Council, Oconee County Planning Commission, and the Oconee Joint Regional Sewer Authority Board. Let's begin the meeting with a moment of silence. Okay, Mr. David Root, would you open us in invocation?
Yes, sir. Pray with me if you'd like to. Dear Father, thank you for this new day that you've given us, this beautiful day. Help us to be appreciative, to have hearts that are full of gratitude for your many gifts, this day being one of them, and each moment in this day. And thank you for this opportunity for these groups to come together so they can have a joint collaboration and do business for the benefit and the welfare of all the citizens in the county. So I pray that you give them insight, clarity of understanding and communication, and just a vision. I pray that this would be your meeting, and in your name I pray. Amen.
Yeah. Mr. Mickey Haney, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Mr. Chip Bentley has been kind enough to come down from Appalachian Council of Governments to help us moderate the meeting. We appreciate you coming. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning, everybody, and appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this discussion again. And a lot of familiar faces, some new faces and everything. We have a hard deadline, a hard stop at noon today, and a pretty aggressive agenda. So I'll work to kind of keep us on track and get through these things, the different items. It also means that we probably will cut some of this conversation a little bit short sometimes. Some of these could really go probably the full hour if we wanted them to. And so as we get into them, if there are things we need to follow back up on, homework that people can do, things like that, and bring back to the groups for their deliberation and maybe future meetings, I'll go ahead and maybe suggest that at the time. So please don't be too offended if I cut you short in part of the discussion as we try and keep going and everything. But I do want to keep the agenda rolling here so we can get through all the items. I do want to real quick, I don't want y'all to have to hear too much from me, but I kind of want to real quick provide a little context for this discussion so we can kind of frame the questions a little bit closer. And so when you look at sewer provision and growth and development within the county for any infrastructure provider, and I deal with this in all 6 counties here in the upstate, it works the same way. And that, you know, the biggest challenge for any infrastructure provider, water, sewer, and everything is knowing where it's going to go and how they're going to get it there in a timely manner, what that time frame is going to be. And so whether it's in the existing footprint within the 3 cities right now where sewer collection exists, or you're talking about the other unincorporated portions where you're trying to put sewer, you know, the hardest question to define is where is it going to go, when's it going to be needed, and how much is it going to cost, and how you can allocate your resources to get there. So when we're talking about this, I think the general framework of these discussions are how does the sewer authority and the county work together to make sure that as the county grows, you guys do it in a way that's as efficient as possible, makes best use of the resources you have, and does it orderly so that you understand where it's going. It kind of provides both groups an expectation of what's going to come, what your goals are, and how you're going to work together to achieve them. So, and that just becomes the challenge for everybody, for the county, for you guys to provide services, to know where you're going to provide them and everything, for the sewer authority to be able to plan. Because, you know, if you're planning for sewer, it's not a short process. It is we really need to know what the build out in 10 years is so we can start that process now, because, you know, you're sizing a line today and then somebody comes down the road and says, hey, we need this over here. Well, we would have sized this line differently. Things like that come into play. So I think that's sort of the context of this discussion and these questions. So think about that as you get into it, and we'll jump right into this first question here. It says, clarify and understand the roles of each of the following, especially as they relate to growth and development: County Council, Planning Commission, and the Sewer Authority. And I think what we're looking at here is, you know, if there's a spokesman person for each of the 3, or, you know, a couple people want to say it, just your ideas of what you feel your role is in defining kind of growth and development, and what role you play as that moves forward in the future, especially as it relates to sewer, from that standpoint. And I would probably ask that county council start.
Chip,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to amend this agenda.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to go into the restructure of the sewer authority. Second paragraph in the Seneca Journal, and we need to know, are we gonna be dealing with these people 6 months from now? Or is there gonna be a new structure in that area that we're not familiar with? And the decisions we're making or talking about today may not even be relevant 6 months from now.
I would say two things. So one, I don't know about an imminent restructuring at the sewer authority or their board. So I don't believe right now there's an imminent restructuring within the next 6 months. What I will say is that I don't know if decisions will be made today as much as a discussion about how to move forward together as a group. And some of those issues are pertinent if the structure is going to change down the road. So I would say, and I don't know if you're referring to the regional sewer feasibility study with RIA, with the Rural Infrastructure Authority or not. I don't know about any restructuring, so that's news to me. It's, I'm dancing a little here. So, but in terms of that moving forward, I think that's a discussion everybody would need to have, and it includes the county as part of that discussion. I think today, in the context we're looking at is, in terms of putting sewer out in the future, regardless of the structure and how it fits and what roles each group plays, what we're trying to do is get to the idea of we need to all move forward together and whatever that structure looks like and figure out where it's going to go and what's going to be needed to get there. And so that's kind of, clarifying the sewer authority, whether its structure is a little bit different or not, their role is still going to be, we're the ones providing, well, they'll tell you their role, I won't know, but I would still think their role is going to be the same regardless of what their structure is. Maybe how they approach it is different, but the role that they play in terms of that future growth and development be the same way it'll be for the county. We can ask the question if you like about whether that's going to be restructured in the next 6 months or not. I don't know that, so.
I don't see that happening in the next.
Yeah, so,
We haven't even received authorization from the state yet to put out the request for proposals for the agency that's gonna come in and do the study.
right. So there's no imminent change in that structure that I know of. I know that there is, the Rural Infrastructure Authority asked them to undertake that. And so they are going to be looking at that in the future, but there's nothing imminent, and that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to change either. To be honest, as the last one on here, I actually see that tying into this larger discussion we're having and being a good step down the road to continue this discussion and get more detail about how that moves forward and what the relationships are. So,
Man, if I may, can I speak?
Yes, sir.
So, from my perspective, I think the county council's job is planning for economic development. For instance, exit 1, exit 2, and exit 4. And also finding funding for that potential sewer lines. So that's where I see the county council is for economic development and planning for it and then requesting for sewer work, like exit 1, 2, and 4, as we open up the I-85 corridor.
all right. Any other comments from?
Chairman, the way I see this first bullet here, before we can set, in my mind, and before we can set roles for the county council planning commission, we need to know what the sewer authority is asking for. What is the end product, so that we can set roles that can give those pieces of information to who needs them.
Okay.
I mean, to just sit here and set roles, I don't think would be efficient. We need to know what the sewer authority needs in their planning from the planning commission and from county council to go forward before we set roles.
All right. So, okay. Hold on to that thought. Planning Commission, would y'all like to talk about how you see your role? Don't know.
All eyes on you, Mr.
My role, I feel that the planning commission's role is to protect the the agricultural community in this county, with any plan or anything that we do, and to, manage the growth that happens in this county.
Okay. When you say manage growth, can you elaborate that on a little bit? I-
Mike?
With regard to growth, obviously, we're here with the sewer authority. Sewer creates density elements that are not typical of, say, septic. And so from a planning commission standpoint, where the sewer lines are is where the growth is going to be driven to potentially. And so we're looking at how to deal with that, because while they're dealing with sewer lines, we're also dealing with stop signs and traffic lights.
Right, right. Okay. So for the sewer authority, what do you see your role as?
Go ahead.
We, you know, and this is from the administration standpoint at the sewer authority, but I see our role is serving what county council, the planning commission, the city councils, their economic development and growth arms within their planning commissions within the cities, and us serving to meet the needs of what they want to do, what you all want to do. It's nothing more. We don't drive growth. You know, we don't have the intention of dictating where growth occurs in the county and where it doesn't occur in the county. We feel that is the role for others besides us here within this agency. And I believe, unless, you know, I'll be corrected if I'm mistaken here, but that's not the role that the board feels as well with their seat and what their responsibility is to the sewer authority and their responsibility as a commissioner.
So going back to your comment, Mr. Mize, that you want to know what the sewer authority needs, and you, the planning commission kind of reiterated it too, because you framed it as you react to where sewer goes, and then you address those growth needs, you know, specifically, because that's a denser development type than non-sewered, which is, you know, limited by septic tanks. And you said you want to know what they need. So I think what I'm hearing from the sewer authority is what they want to know is where you want growth to occur, because from that planning standpoint, if you're the sewer authority, for them to be able to extend sewer, that there's a time factor for them. They need to know where it's going so they can understand what the cost factor is and then tell you what they need from that standpoint, like time frame and everything else. So, you know, I think, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, Chris, but I think what I'm hearing is Chris is saying what he wants from y'all is to know where it needs to go. Then they can figure out what that cost is going to be, how they're going to do that, what that framework needs to be.
And that's where I was going with that, because planning commission is gonna see it first, generally gonna see it first. And then it'll come to county council, and then he'll be on the back end. But there needs to be a structure where ahead of time, for planning purposes, the sewer authority needs to know what's coming down the pipe, so to speak, so that they can be planning ahead before it even gets to us. I mean, there's no problem in planning. It may come to us and we may say no.
Right.
But it doesn't hurt to spend a little time planning. You can always put it on the bookshelf.
Right. And I think you're right. And I think that is, you know, ultimately even getting down to the feasibility study in the end, some of what's needed is that discussion to take place, even in large scale, not just project to project. This is what we hear is coming, that's come to the planning commission, they want to develop that, but even from a county standpoint, you know, I know agricultural protection for part of the county is a big deal. I know protection in the mountain areas, different things like that. If you could even begin to narrow down places where the sewer authority could understand, okay, we're never gonna put it out here, so if somebody comes and says, hey, we need sewer from you, they're like, yeah, that's not gonna happen. You know, so they don't have to go down that hole, so they don't waste time on that project. And you guys, the same thing. If you guys have a project comes before you and you're thinking of, it needs sewer, then maybe sewer authority's like, yeah, we won't be able to get there in 10 years, you know, and that timing thing, because that timing piece for them is, it's much harder to get to. I think that kind of discussion, I think, would benefit everybody in the room, honestly, to be able to kind of get everybody on the same page so that as you move forward, you're moving forward in lockstep, not you know, cross purposes and things get to you and you say no after everybody else has kind of gotten through it and you're like, oh, well, okay, we did a lot of planning for nothing, you know, kind of thing, so.
If I may, because this I think will be helpful to understanding how we operate for everybody in the room. And I know that it was mentioned that the county wishes to protect the agricultural areas of the county. But the way we operate is we're a service provider, much like, you know, Blue Ridge or Duke or anybody else. And if somebody goes and they buy a large tract of property right in the heart of the agricultural portion between, say, Seneca and the interstate, and they're gonna develop it, and they wanna pay to run and connect the line to the treatment plant, there's no constraint that we have to prevent them from doing that. If they pay to run the line, our role is to serve it. That is, you know, we don't see us, we're not a zoning entity, we're a service provider. We feel that's, you know, anything above that is beyond what our role is within the county, within the entire service area.
And this is a question that comes up in all the counties I work with, from Greenville to Spartanburg to Cherokee and, you know, Pickens and everything, is getting that conversation going. The crux of the problem here is the same as I've had this debate with Greenville County for over 20 years now, where I've asked the question and both of them sort of respond. The county's like, well, we'll let develop wherever sewer is gonna go. And the sewer authority says, we're gonna go wherever they let development happen. There's a gap there, you know, where nobody's making that decision. And I think that's a conversation that would benefit you guys, at least to begin to narrow down, this is where we think is reasonable for development to go. Not to say what it would be or dictate it or anything, but to say, at least the sewer authority has an idea. Here's areas we know we think should stay agricultural, you know, the mountain areas, things like that. So being to call that out, it at least reduces the amount of confusion, the amount of, you know, trails you go down looking at what are the possibilities here, and you guys are on the same page moving forward. And it makes it easier for them to give you information about what it'll take, what they need, how we could do this and moving forward. And I think that would benefit the county to understand what the real, you know, cost and challenges would be in providing sewer at different parts and how that would work moving forward, so.
And I think that hits directly on it. I think there's a lot of misconceptions with, between all of us on who does what. And that's why we've asked for this meeting. That's why we really want the planning commission on board. As Chris said, we provide a service. That's what we're here for. We don't try to push growth. We don't try to hold growth back. We don't care one way or the other where you want to grow. You know, we're just here to provide that service, and that's it. And there's a lot of rhetoric out there that the sewer's holding up this or trying to push it in one place or another. We're not. We just provide the service. But we can't be efficient providing that service if we don't know where y'all want it. And the two things that happened recently that validate the need for this meeting, Sewer South was a go. County Council was for it. They paid for it. They're ready to push it, and it's going. We do what we can do to get it there for you. Then you had the Green Paw project over there that Chris has spent, I don't know, 200 or 300 hours working on, and in the last hour, we find out the county council's not for that. In a perfect world, if we had unlimited funds, anybody that walks in, we'll throw the sewer out there, expand it, and do what they want. But due to the consent order and all the issues we're having to deal with and the increased cost of everything, it makes it harder on the sewer authority to determine where we're gonna put the funds. Having the planning commission here to let us know what areas we should be looking for industrial growth or residential will help Chris when he's doing his designs, trying to get engineering on new developments or any kind of expansion or increased capacity. He knows what y'all want. Planning commission does that for you guys. You guys determine yea or nay, and then Chris has got something, he's got a map to work off of. He knows what he needs to add to. But if there's an area that y'all have a plan in mind that we don't know about, that y'all are gonna leave a certain way, we don't want Chris spending all this amount of time trying to figure out how to get, 10 million gallons a day to somewhere that y'all are not gonna support. Mr. Ramey? Yes, sir.
I don't think that I may be speaking wrong, but, Green Paw, we didn't vote to stop that.
No.
We voted to not give them the $3 million kickback. That's what we voted for. As far as the project, I'm concerned it's still on track.
No, I'm not saying he's trying to stop it. It's just y'all didn't throw the support into it, the financial support. The sewer authority has money from our ratepayers. That's the money we have, the people who we've been providing sewer to for years. That's what we have. And if you want growth in a certain area, we've got to determine if the council's going to support it, just like you did sewer south. And that's why we wanted everybody to get together, because we keep hearing this, that the sewer's pushing, the sewer authority's pushing sewer to certain areas, holding it back on others, and we're not doing that. We're just trying to, Chris has got his hands full, and the board makes decisions based on what we hear. And we would like to know what the planning commission wants and what y'all want, so that we work for you. We provide a service for you. We're not trying to direct it. We just need direction from you guys so that we know where you do want it at.
And that's where my first question started out from. It doesn't appear there's any structure between the three entities.
So
In the study y'all worked on, or the design you worked on Green Paw, that's not wasted.
Mhm.
Like Glenn said, we voted not to approve the $3 million kickback, period. Those folks are that project's probably gonna go forth. So your time wasn't wasted on that. You're probably gonna have to deal with that sooner or later.
So, look, just so we can move on and everything and keep it going, I think what I'm hearing is everybody's sort of in agreement that maybe more discussions need to be had about what growth looks like in the future, where you think it's gonna go, so you can all be on the same page, and maybe that's future discussions, whether it's the planning commission and some structure, like you said, some structure that puts together, and maybe that's the next step that y'all can work on to put that in place, so you have that discussion with the sewer authority and council and the planning commission, so everybody's on the same page and has a better understanding of that. So I think that's probably a good place to put that. It also, a comment you made segues into the next question, which I think is probably gonna be Chris talking about, is talking about what the current and projected sewer capacity is. And when you're talking about sewer capacity, you're not talking about just the plant and what the capacity of the plant is to treat that, but you're also talking about the collection systems, because there is a limit to what some of them can take based on pump station, line sizing, things like that. So I'll let Chris speak to that.
So as Mr. Bentley mentioned, we look at capacity two different ways. The treatment plant has plenty of capacity. It's rated for 7.8 million gallons per day. And it currently, on a dry day, we receive about 2.5, 2.6 million gallons. On a wet day, we may get 6, 7, 8 million gallons a day coming in that we have to treat just because of infrastructure improvements that are needed in the system. Those infrastructure improvements that are necessary outside the gate of the treatment plant is what impacts the capacity in the system as a whole. So if we can get it to the plant, we can treat it, but there's areas out in the county that we can't get the flow from a point to the plant to treat it, whether it's undersized pipes, pump stations that are undersized or beyond their useful life. And the Green Paw example is a good one to go with. And not just Green Paw, but anything that's between Seneca and Lake Hartwell on 123, Clemson, is we have some major constraints for flow that would go through the pump station that Mr. Brent Little was speaking of, which is the Seneca Creek Station. So this station is a regional station. It's located near the intersection of Wells Highway and 123. The station is 40 years old. The pipe diameter that comes from the pump station is a pressurized pipe, what's called a force main. That force main is a 10-inch diameter pipe. So if we can replace that pipe, just upsizing that line from a 10-inch to a 16-inch, I believe is what the engineer is designing for that, we would be able to get several 100,000 gallons of additional flow through that line per day without making any changes to the pump station. Well, the pump station also needs to be replaced. It's well beyond its useful life and is having structural issues related to it. So we have approached addressing that one in a couple of different phases. One would be to replace the force main, upsize that, accommodate some additional growth, and then down the road, replace the pump station, which would open that area up for what the engineers anticipate would be a 20-plus year solution. So when we speak of capacity, that's what we speak of. I think we're gonna gain some capacity back as us and the cities address inflow and infiltration issues that we have. But there are certain areas in the county that we are not able to move the flow. There's also one on the western side of Seneca as well. There's a bottleneck or a constraint in a line. It's a small diameter line, an 8-inch pipe, fronts 123 and travels down to Richland Creek and eventually ties in at Conneross Creek and comes to the treatment plant. Well, I know that us and I believe the city of Seneca both have constraints on that area now that would, that we can only accept so much flow from that area. So we're having to watch that to make sure that we can accommodate that without running the risk of additional overflows. And just to let you know where these constraints, how it affects us, and this is looking at the entire area of the county that we consider to be developable, which is anything kind of at the toe of the slope of going up into a mountainous area. That since the beginning of 2022, if I remember correctly, we had received requests for close to 4,600 acres that somebody had called and asked us about to see if there was sewer service there. Some of those, most of those will never happen, but those were the inquiries that we were receiving. Some of those are in areas where there's no capacity to be served. Some of those requests were between, say, Seneca and Clemson. Others were, in areas that we can serve, but whether the development takes place or not, we don't know. But I hope that addresses that point.
Does anybody else have a question about that? Okay.
Well, if I may too, I know this has been something that's been asked before, since we're talking about capacity, and I'll go ahead and specifically address industrial capacity. There was a thought out there, or something had been brought out publicly, that there was an idea that we did not have the ability to serve any additional industries, and I think that it was particularly related to metals. And that's not the case. We have plenty of capacity to treat the metals and any other type of regulated contaminant that is through a permitted facility through our pre-treatment process. I believe it's in the 38 to 39% range of how much we can still allocate out there to industry, which is a considerable amount. We also have a number of industries that have, if you want to call it, they're over permitted for the amount of flow that they need. And there may be someone that has a permitted flow for 100,000 gallons, and they're only using 30,000 gallons a day. Well, that allocated flow, the pollutants that we can treat are based on the full 100,000 gallons that they're permitted for, and not what we're actually seeing. So we've approached some of the industries, actually all the industries, about seeing if they would return some of that flow back to us, which would open up additional allocation that we would be able to provide to either existing industries that we're looking to expand, or for new industrial users to tap into those, that additional that we have set aside for future growth. But we do have capacity for industrial pollutants or contaminants, if you will, for us to be able to treat at the plant. It still would require pre-treatment at the site, as any other permitted facility does, if it meets those federal requirements and state requirements that we have to abide by. But we are, we have plenty of capacity to handle that.
Okay. The next bullet point was talking about air-wide sewer master plan that addresses developable areas of the county that were not included in the Fairplay Townville Sewer Basin Plan. So there was a process that went about a year ago, I guess finished up about a year ago, that looked at that Fairplay Townville area. But there are other portions of the county that weren't included in that might be, including exits on the interstate down in Anderson County and things like that. And so I think this is a discussion maybe about the potential for moving forward. Would it be something people were interested in doing, looking at that area of the county and like at least doing a plan to say, what would it take to sewer this area if we wanted to? I'll open that to anybody that, yes, sir.
I got something on the last subject we were on. You were talking about you were getting requests from everyone for certain areas or sewer here and there. That's information that would be helpful to the planning commission to know where people want growth. I mean, we don't have that information, and then we make a decision, well, we don't want it there, but you've gotten all kind of requests for it to be there. So that type of information would be very helpful to planning commission and council. If we could work together, that goes back to working together with all three of us, get the information that everybody needs. And that is one thing that we could use.
I put together a map that shows this, and I believe that I had emailed a copy of that map, an electronic version, to the county for distribution to those that were interested. But I'll go ahead and resend that again. I'll send it to Ms. Brock and have her disseminate it to.
And maybe as part of that, that first bullet point, we kind of left the homework as figuring out a structure to have more conversations. Maybe we create structure for that, be regular communication when they get a request. And sometimes maybe it's, they're like, they don't want that out there, but when you guys get a request and you think it's just open, people are talking, they can pass along to the county and planning commission, hey, we're hearing requests in this area, so that gives you some information as you deliberate on where things might go. And that might actually just help that communication and that flow back and forth, so there's not, yes, sir.
So, and it's kind of piggybacking on what Frankie said. A sewer line can lead growth, like what it's doing down to the interstate. But for the county where most of it's control-free, the market's driving the growth. And like Green Paw, it's not that we stopped it, we just didn't incentivize it. And I don't intend to incentivize any high-density residential housing. But the market's there, so it's probably still gonna wanna come. And I can look at it and say, okay, I think the market's driving development to between Seneca and Clemson. But we have data that's available between y'all's requests that you're receiving and the planning department to where we can trend where that market's driving growth and where that demand is going to.
Okay. All right. Back to the question. So looking at additional basins within the county in terms of sewering, especially that section's probably just adjacent to the sewer plan that went, it was 24 the ridge that y'all stopped on?
Yeah, it was,
Yeah, so,
for the most part, I think 24 was the.
right, so it's fair play up to sort of 24 being the eastern boundary of that study, but that leaves, that other section to the county line wasn't looked at. Is that something people would be interested in moving forward with and talking about in terms of looking at potential sewer? And part of that, Anderson County, with the exits they have on that side of the lake, they don't have any sewer there available. They might be interested in participating in that too, because that basin all flows down into Anderson County. So one thing about water and sewer, they don't really respect political boundaries very well. They just go wherever the water goes. So, and I guess I'm just asking that, is that a talking point moving forward that y'all would like to see?
So, we felt the study that was done and presented back in January, I believe it was to county council by Weston and Sampson, was a highly successful evaluation. It didn't, the intent of that was not to tell us what to do, it was this is what could happen. As Mr. Bentley said, we have to think years out when we begin our planning process. And whether it's extending lines or adding a treatment plant or whatever the case may be, we thought it was great to have that. Where we think that this is even more critical now for the existing area, you know, anywhere, Walhalla, Westminster, Seneca, the areas outside and in between those, is to identify what growth may happen and what infrastructure and improvements are needed to be able to serve those areas. And whether it's, you know, multifamily housing that may come, or an industrial site, or a large retail location, it's not one of these things that they approach us and say, we've got this economic development project code name, whatever, they're ready to be here. When can you have sewer, or how soon can we get it? And we're not talking months, we're talking years to be able to serve some of these. Even if we have something with a line that runs right in front of it, if it's not properly sized, it's, you know, there's so much space inside the pipes and inside the pumps that we're able to handle and stay within the constraints of the laws, regulations, and our operating permit. So and you know, I believe somebody held up a copy of the paper. There was, I think it was in yesterday's paper, but it took place at our board meeting on Monday. There was considerable and very good discussion about the views as to, you know, what the study and how it would benefit us. And I have put in, and have in the past put in, to have this type of a study performed for the area that we currently serve now, because it helps me to be able to plan if we do make improvements, to say like the Seneca Creek pump station, or that small diameter line on the western part of Seneca. If we have to replace it to be in compliance with our consent order, what, you know, instead of putting it back the same diameter, that's gonna limit growth, which is, you know, the financial side of that comes in. You don't wanna put something in place that's gonna have to be replaced sometime sooner. So it makes, to me, it makes sense to account for potential future growth. But is that what my board wants to do? Is that what, you know, we're tasked to do? So we realize that it's important. You know, the study is gonna be $350,000 for the remaining portion of the county. And of course, I would, you know, not be doing my job if I didn't come and ask for the county to help support this study financially. I have, I will not say who, and I will not say the amount, but I did get a verbal commitment at the very least to help pay for a pretty substantial portion of this study, possibly, you know, in the quarter to a third of the cost. So, you know, with that said, if anybody else would like to help participate in this to actually make this move forward, then that would be great. Because I'm gonna put it in my budget that's being presented for approval for next year, but that doesn't mean it's gonna stay in the budget. If the board wishes for it to be taken out, then it won't occur. And we'll continue working toward replacing infrastructure in a like-for-like size.
So I think a point you bring up here actually fits with Mr. Durham earlier, and, you know, the market's driving it where the market wants it. That's where it's gonna go, and that's what we need to think about. But from their standpoint, you know, and this skips ahead to the bullet that talks about the consent orders and what's required, so we'll talk about that maybe, but a little bit. But it does speak to, they have two jobs. One, how to provide sewer in those places that are unsewered, and, you know, and where you might want development, but also how to continue to provide in the existing footprint that you have and the development that occurs there. And to do that, it's a two-part question. How do we make sure we meet the needs that exist, but do it at the same time, make sure we know what the future need of that line is gonna be? Because if we go replace a 6-inch line with a 6-inch line, that means nobody else, and it's full right now, then you're not allowing for future development within that basin. They just need to know whether that development is gonna, so, because it doesn't make sense to do it and then 5 years later say we need to upsize the line. That's just inefficient use of limited resources that, you know, of whoever is putting that together. So I think it goes to that earlier discussion of understanding where that's gonna be them having an idea where the council understand where the requests are gonna be, where the market might be driving that, so you can think about, what that's gonna look like and what you're gonna allow in terms of density, planning commission as they consider that. And then the sewer authority have an idea what you see going forward, so they know how to proceed when it comes to existing upgrades they need to make, or repairs they need to make, or future growth and things like that. Yes, Ms. Davis?
I'm gonna start my stopwatch, so I know how long I talk, so I'm gonna try to make it quick. Expectations from where I sit on the Joint Regional Sewer Authority is, and again, it's been stated in here, is request, and you have sent that map out, it is available, and I've looked at a lot of it, but a quarterly report of, hey, where's this going in? That way, your report from your board comes out, hey, here's a quarterly report on what we're seeing that comes out council and planning commission on there. Pretty simple to do. I don't think it needs to be monthly because there's not enough data in a monthly time point to do that. That is to me, is ever changing. So to me, a quarterly report that just comes out saying, hey, here's where we're seeing requests coming from. The other one is, pump station lives and replacement plans. A lot of the pump stations are pretty much owned by Joint Regional Sewer Authority. What's the replacement plan on there? What is it servicing? Is it 60% servicing city sewer? Is it 60% is it 60-40? In other words, 40% servicing outside. Just a little help on that, so we kind of look at, is that a replacement plan that we as council are going to have to come up with some funding on that, some thought process behind that. Capacity issue, bottleneck areas identified by Joint Regional Sewer Authority. As you know, I've been on here 7+ years, learned part of this is a city issue, part of this is the Joint Regional Sewer Authority, where we're coming into play, because it's very easy to look at capacity issues and go, hey, this is great, we've got 500 acres that is prime for development, actually in an area that people seem to want development in there, but it's never going to occur because of a specific bottleneck area. That may be part city, that may be part Joint Regional Sewer Authority. Identifying that together helps us all come up with a plan. So it may be a City of Westminster, Joint Regional Sewer Authority, County Council together coming up with a plan, or it may be Joint Regional Sewer Authority, City of Seneca, and County Council looking at those specific areas that are outlying areas outside of there. Constraint issues, you kind of brought up the 8-inch pipes, looking at upgrading those to 10-inch, 12-inch pipes, or, I think you brought up a 16-inch pipe in there. Where are those at? What do those need? Because to me, you can look at a vacant land, especially if you're heading down 123, it's pretty simple to say, hey, it's pretty stupid to go back with an 8-inch pipe here. If we upgrade that, the grant only pays for this. If county council's willing to help out with this, here's what that looks like, because we're the ones that handle the taxation money from the citizens for that actually could help lower if that area grew. And we see that as an area growing, planning agrees with that. And pretty much if you're heading down 123, seems like everybody agrees that area is prime business development. On a city expectation, using the user fees that you get to maintain your own system, not spending the money elsewhere. That's kind of and I think the majority of y'all are doing that, but it's kind of hard for us, and I haven't seen this to where y'all are like, hey, we need help with this. Y'all are doing grants and stuff like that, but that's just a standard expectations. I don't think, to me as a county council person, and I'll speak for me and probably pretty much everything I hear, the expectation is for y'all not to service and spend all this money outside of your cities, because it's going to do exactly what I feel like is happening inside your cities. Your I&I is going crazy. Your consent orders that's on there is an issue. So to me, using your user fees that you're getting with your city residents to maintain the inner city is to me the most important part of where I see the cities are. So I'm at 4 minutes, so I'm stopping.
In the interest of time, because we got just over 15 minutes left and several bullets here, I'm going to ask Chris if maybe he can give a quick overview of like capital needs inside and outside the system, kind of as you see it right now, and then maybe talk about if y'all could talk about the consent orders, just a quick overview of those.
Well, I think those two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So the capital needs that we have
I'll start with the treatment plant and then move out from there. The treatment plant, to get it back to where it needs to be, to where we can push through the full 7.8 million gallons a day if necessary. We've been slowly chipping away at this without incurring any debt. Started back in, I believe it was 2018, when I came there and had a full year under my belt and saw where we lacked, and then brought Kyle Lindsay, our operations director, has really come in and really stepped up even more in where I can just turn that over to him and allow him to go and begin budgeting and putting in place and identifying the proper order to replace things to maximize what we're able to handle at the plant and minimize the costs that we see would lead to substantial improvements necessary in the future. So I think we're in pretty good shape with what we need at the plant. We don't know how far out we are from needing an expansion of the plant, or I'm not, heaven forbid, even think about any other plants we may need in the immediate area. We just need to get what we have up to where we can handle everything that could come through the facility. Out in the system, and by the way, too, the consent order, we're not under a consent order for anything associated with the treatment plant. And we just had our inspection about 6 weeks ago or so, and from all indications were everything was great when DHEC came by. It's out in the collection system that we're under the requirement to make considerable improvements, and those were due to wet weather issues and several force mains that we've had breaks on that were, on 40-year-old aged lines. So we're addressing those, and that is because just the replacement, not even adding in the wet weather issues, the replacement of force mains is expensive in and of itself. All the lines we have, and us being more of a wholesale trunk type sewer system that treats the wastewater from the cities, what we do is we move it from the cities to the treatment plants, which means that most of our lines are larger diameter, 12-inch up to 30, even 36-inch is what we have. And as you can already tell, it's much more expensive to maintain, rehabilitate, and replace a large diameter pipe than it would be an 8-inch smaller diameter pipe. So we received some money from the state through the SKIP grant that's administered by RA. We received close to $9.6 million plus the match that we have to provide. And that is primarily going to be spent on replacing a pump station that actually serves the location where this building is located now, this section of Walhalla. It will be replacing a piece of equipment that we have at the treatment plant that handles our solids for disposal, and then but the bulk of it is going to be spent to rehabilitate areas that we find that need to be repaired out in the system. And that is, I think that's, in the neighborhood of $5 to $6 million that we see. That's not gonna cover it. That's not gonna complete everything that we need to do just to rehabilitate our existing system. And that does not take into scope anything to do with growth. So we're, a sewer system, of course, I've operated a water system before, and with wastewater is a completely different beast. It's, the corrosivity of the water, the conditions of what you're trying to move, it's much more difficult and expensive to operate and maintain a wastewater system than it is a drinking water system. So, the full scope of everything that we need to do capital-wise out in the system, and I'll call it the county as well as what we serve, our pipelines that are inside the city, the full scope of that is not known. We are in the process now of identifying what needs to be done, and that process is going to be performed over a 8, 9, 10-year period to comply with what we had to do with our consent order, which was an audit called a capacity management, operation, and maintenance audit. So over that time frame, we'll be looking and investigating through scientific techniques using cameras, smoke testing, cleaning the lines to find out what is needed and what needs to be fixed. But the thing, as I mentioned a minute ago, wastewater is a different beast, because once you get through it one time, you don't just stop for another 30 years. You start back over again and over again. So it's a continuous 10-year cycle with what we have, and that is part of what we have to do with our consent order. So, does that address any questions or concerns about those needs?
Did I understand? Maybe I did. Did I understand you're gonna use part of this money that you've been granted to take care of some of the consent order problems?
Yes, sir, that's correct. And we also, I had budgeted for this in our current fiscal year before we were even awarded the grant to perform a number of known issues that we had to repair and replace deficiencies in the system. And while we waited to get those reports back from the engineer, we had to go and clean and camera the inside of these lines, provide that data to the engineer for them to provide us with recommendations for what needed to be done to repair, replace, or rehabilitate these lines. We are just now, this week, got a copy of all of that back. So the monies that I had budgeted to do that work, I'm gonna roll that into next year and perform that, as well as what we were gonna do with our money that we received from the state with that grant.
I remember at your annual meeting, you had, well, it was on PowerPoint, we had a pretty good layout of how you was gonna finance meeting the consent order and at different stages. And maybe you could send everybody a copy of that PowerPoint that was in there.
Yes, sir, I can do that. It's on the website under the board meeting minutes, but I'll provide a copy of that as well.
So I think, unless there's other questions, I think that took care of capital needs and the update on the consent orders. There's a bullet here for need for rate schedule for Sewer South. We don't have a lot of time left, so do you want to speak to that quickly, Chris? So the challenge, for Sewer South is you're putting sewer in for some existing development, but also development that doesn't exist yet. So the question is, how do you pay for the cost of that when you don't have the users yet? So it's the chicken and the egg. In this case, if the egg's coming first, we gotta figure out how to, and so, and I think that's the crux of that question is how is that gonna be structured? That sounds more like a homework question, but I just wanna kind of frame the question.
Well, the way, we just did if you want to call it we reconfigured the way that we're doing rates on our existing system. So we went from a model that's called the pro rata share method, and if anybody has interest in learning what that even was, call me outside of this and I'll try my best to explain it. But it'll begin coming July of this year, we'll go to what is a traditional method where we charge the actual users at the connection. It is based on water meter readings, what flow goes in. If they have sewer, is gonna be assumed that's what goes out, so there'll be a base rate plus per 1,000 gallon charge for residential and non-residential users. We have separate rates on the existing system. As far as what needs to be done for the retail side of our system, the Sewer South area, is we don't know what the cost is gonna be to necessarily operate that system down there. So we have an idea of what it costs to treat the wastewater once it gets to the plant, but the operation of the system that really doesn't exist at this time is kind of a head scratcher to us. We have, electricity costs, how frequently are we gonna have to go down there? Does anybody want to have any money set aside for future capital, potential debt service to be able to expand
pipelines down that way. So I think those are some of the items that we would have to consider when we do discuss a rate for those areas. And with that, it would require somebody, I think, other than myself, to be able to identify what those rates need to be.
So somebody asked me the other day, and just make sure I'm not telling people wrong. The way this is set up, Sewer South and the rest of the system is pretty much gonna function as two separate systems, with separate accounting, from operating expenses to revenue, everything.
That's correct, yes, sir. Yeah, so the way that it's set up in this by agreement is that the two systems cannot subsidize one another. The only place that they're gonna have any interaction where there's overlap is at the treatment plant with that process. But Sewer South can't subsidize the wholesale system what we do now for the member cities, nor can the member cities subsidize the operation financially of the Sewer South system. So your understanding is correct.
Well, hopefully moving forward, council will, in my opinion, needs to set some millage aside as a sewer fund, because with the amount of line that you have in there and that you're adding, and from what I can tell, looking to add, if you're not gonna set aside any kind of millage or anything for that, you're gonna be pulling from here and pulling from there. So whether I sit up here or somebody else sits up here, if we're not looking at that, it's gonna bite us real quick. Because we're gonna not, is council gonna turn around and look at the sewer authority and say, hey, by the way, y'all need to fix this? And what's sewer authority gonna turn around and look at us going, we're not fixing it? I think y'all been very clear in that. So if council's not gonna set aside money, moving forward for long-term, plans, and I recommend a fund for that. I'm not saying, not up here saying tax increase, I'm saying that look at this moving forward, and we've done a very good job in the past few budgets of setting aside millage for specific things, capital vehicle replacement, is specifically one of those that I call out that allowed for an actual plan and usage. Is things gonna happen that it's gonna cost money that's unbudgeted? It probably is. As we can see with Sewer South, the cost is already, we added another $1 million there. There's probably gonna be another $1 million coming around in here. So if we're not even thinking about it and we're not prepared for it and don't have a, millage sitting aside for it, and it needs to be probably one meal a year, because you're gonna spend it. It's gonna be there, especially moving forward. Because you cannot, in my opinion, rely on your ratepayers specifically in that, because there's not enough people that can tie into that system to pay for it. And, maybe I'm wrong, but I've been in a lot of sewer meetings and talked with Chris and a lot of the board members a long time. I don't think sewer is paying for that stuff. It's other things. It's taxes collected off the industry, which is why you run the sewer lines. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, that you're not going to pay for this system by user fees. You're going to have to create some kind of fund to help maintain it, extend it, and pay for emergency situations. Thank you.
In an effort to honor the noon stoppage, which is about a minute from now, technically, so I'll try and kind of wrap up. I think it's been a really good discussion. I appreciate everybody kind of pitching into that discussion and sharing your thoughts. A couple of key takeaways. One, I think the most important is structure moving forward, and I think it ties into the last bullet that we did not talk about, although we did touch on at the beginning, that sewer feasibility planning study that the authority is looking at. I think when you talk about creating structure, creating dialogue, having these conversations so everybody's on the same page moving forward, that would be an opportunity for everybody to participate and get a sense of where that's going. And if everybody was a part of that in some way, I think that would be beneficial long-term. I think the other little things is Sewer Authority providing some information on their presentation on capital needs and creating some structure for how that information about where requests that you guys get go. And I would hope that would go vice versa. Requests the county gets or planning commission gets, you could pass that along. And if you created that back and forth, then that's a conversation that y'all have more regularly, probably benefits everybody in the end. That quarterly, the quarterly report suggestion you made, Mr. Davis, I think is a good one, maybe have that back and forth and everything. I think, like I said in the beginning, this was a really aggressive agenda and a lot of stuff, and I think we could have talked a lot more about any one of these things. Maybe circling back and setting some future meeting dates to maybe flesh out some of this, having specific requests from the agencies. If y'all want to funnel them through me, you could do that. If either side, any of the groups have a request for more information or more discussion on that, if you want to let me know, I'll be happy to sort of coordinate that maybe a little bit, and I'll be the neutral third party. If you need my email, I'll get it to you. Who will be happy to take that. If you just want to, vent, feel free to call me too. But with that, I will close the meeting so we honor our time frame, unless anybody has a question.
I do have one other request, and this is just something to look at. I think we ought to at least explore the possibility of creating a joint commission or committee with someone from each entity, planning commission, county council, regional authority, possibly the County Economic Alliance, and put a committee together so that everybody can understand what expansion is gonna look like in the future, what it's gonna take to make that expansion, so that we don't redo something that doesn't have to be done. I don't know what it takes to put a committee like that together, and that's not in my wheelhouse to do. Maybe it's in your wheelhouse.
I was gonna say, so I bring no stick to this, but I bring a lot of energy to make the effort to kind of coordinate and see if we can get everybody together to do that. I think that's a great idea, and I think that would be beneficial moving forward.
And it wouldn't have to be a permanent type commission or
Right.
committee. It can be to address what's the most urgent needs right now, and then look forward.
Okay.
But I think
How about I commit to this? I'll talk to the heads of the parties involved and see what that could look like and how we move forward with that.
Be great.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.